Welcome, wanderer. Come closer. Tonight, let me guide you into the quiet places of the world. Breathe slowly, and let the moonlight take your weight away. A soft wind drifts through the canopy, carrying the silver scent of night. The leaves tremble gently, as if whispering secrets to the moon above. Somewhere far in the darkness, an owl exhales a low, steady call. The forest breathes slowly, and in that breath, the world seems to quiet itself. You take a step upon the moss, and the ground accepts you without a sound. The air is cool, tender against your skin, like a hand leading you deeper into calmness. A thread of moonlight slips between the branches, resting on the path ahead. You follow it without thinking, as though you have known this path all your life. The trees lean inward, forming an arch as soft as a lullaby. Their shadows sway like curtains drawn open to welcome you. Every rustle seems to beckon. Enter, wander, rest. The night is not dark here. It glows gently, like an old memory. The deeper you walk, the quieter your thoughts become. Something ancient watches with kindness, not with fear. Something patient has been waiting for you. A cluster of pale luminescence gathers in the distance. It rises, settles, and rises again, like a slow heartbeat made of light. The wind shifts, brushing the hair by your ear, as if urging you closer, and from that glow, a silhouette steps into view. At first, she is only light, shaped like the curve of the crescent moon. Then she becomes a woman, tall and serene, wrapped in stillness. A silver bough rests against her shoulder, glimmering like frost upon a winter branch. Her hair, dark as the velvet sky, falls weightlessly along her back. Her eyes shine with the quiet certainty of ancient forests. Her footsteps do not disturb even a single leaf. She walks as though the world softens itself beneath her. She stops a short distance from you, and the forest seems to hold its breath. The moon lifts higher, pouring its glow over her form. Her presence is soft, yet every part of her feels eternal. And when she speaks, her voice is a whisper, woven from wind and water. Welcome, wanderer. Her words do not echo. They settle directly into your chest, warm and steady. This forest has been expecting you. The branches overhead sway gently, as if bowing to her. You have entered the moonlit sanctuary, she continues, a place where time slows and silence becomes a companion. I am Artemis, she says simply, as though the name itself is a lullaby. Guardian of the forests, keeper of the moonlit paths, protector of those who wander between shadows and starlight. The night grows softer around her, as though even darkness respects her presence. You have come seeking rest, Artemis whispers, and rest you shall have. She gestures lightly with her hand, and the world responds. The breeze quiets into a gentle hum. The leaves sway in a rhythm slow enough to soothe your heartbeat. The stars peep through the branches like shy onlookers. Artemis steps beside you, her movement soundless, graceful, effortless. Walk with me, she murmurs. You follow her deeper into the glowing forest, guided by her calm. Her voice continues, drifting like a soft ribbon through the air. There are stories sleeping beneath these trees. Tales older than kingdoms, older than temples, older even than the first whisper of civilization. Some are gentle, some are sorrowful. All are bound to the quiet truth of the wild places. She glances toward the canopy, where moonlight trickles down like liquid silver. Tonight, she whispers, under the watch of the moon, I will share with you the stories I have carried in silence. They belong not to the loud world of mortals, but to the soft, the sacred, the unseen. As she walks, motes of light gather around her feet, blooming like tiny stars. Each step she takes fills the air with a sense of ancient peace. The forest opens before her, revealing paths you would never have noticed alone. These woods, she says gently, hold every breath I have ever taken, every memory, every vow, every victory, every sorrow. You walk now in the shadow of my life. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full, like a deep, comforting breath. You may wonder why I have invited you, she whispers. Her voice seems to glow as brightly as the moon above. It is because you did not come seeking conquest. You did not come with arrows, or fire, or pride. You came with quiet. You came with wonder. And the forest recognized the softness within you. Her eyes turn to you, luminous and steady. And I, she continues, have chosen to guide you. The trees part slightly as she lifts her hand. Ahead lies a clearing wrapped in silver moonlight. Mist drifts slowly across the ground like a sleeping spirit. A small pool mirrors the sky, capturing the moon in its trembling surface. Artemis walks to its edge and kneels. The water stirs at her presence, glowing faintly. This place, she whispers, is the heart of my sanctuary. Here, the forest listens. Here, the moon reveals truths hidden from the waking world. She dips her fingers into the water. Ripples expand outward, carrying a soft glimmer across the pool. You are safe here, she murmurs. You are protected. You are seen. The wind brushes past your shoulders, warm despite the night. A sense of clarity begins to settle in your chest, gentle and slow. Artemis raises her gaze to the treetops. Tonight, she says softly, you will hear my story, but not the story told in temples, not the story sung by bards, trimmed and polished for applause. No, her voice lowers, intimate and calm. You will hear the story as the forest knows it, as the moon has witnessed it, as I whisper it now, only to you. Her expression softens, almost tender. There are parts of my life that mortals have never heard, moments kept in shadow, sealed in silence. But the night is deep, and the world sleeps. And so, she says, I will share them with you. She rises slowly, her form shining with quiet strength. Sit, she instructs, her voice gentle. You lower yourself to the moss beside the shimmering pool. The ground is warm, as though the earth itself is welcoming you. Artemis stands beside the water, silver light clinging to her like mist. For a moment, she closes her eyes, breathing with the rhythm of the world around her. When she opens them again, the forest seems brighter. Before I tell you of my birth, she whispers, before I tell you of Delos and the wandering and the bow I first held, before I speak of the twin whose light shaped my own, there is something I want you to understand. She steps nearer to you, the air cooling pleasantly in her wake. The forest is not merely trees and shadows. It is memory. It is soul. It is refuge. And tonight, it is yours. She moves her hand gently through the air, tracing a slow arc. Moonlight follows her gesture like a soft ribbon. You have entered a world without noise, a world without the weight of day, a world shaped by breath, by stillness, by gentle intention. Artemis seats herself across from you, her posture relaxed yet regal. A soft glow pulses from her bow where it rests at her side. She looks at you with eyes that hold the entire night sky. Let yourself drift, she murmurs. Let your mind soften. There is no haste here, no danger, no fear. Only the quiet paths beneath the moon. She lifts her face to the sky. Now, she whispers, her voice barely louder than the wind, we begin. And the forest exhales, settling into silence around her. A silence ready to cradle the stories she is about to tell. The night breathes with a hush that feels like the first page of a story being turned very, very slowly. A cool mist lifts from the hollows, soft as the exhale of something sleeping beneath the roots. Underfoot, The moss gives a gentle, forgiving welcome, cushioning every step as if the forest remembers the soles of your feet. Leaves whisper in the dark, not with frantic gossip, but with the patient exchange of old friends trading twilight. A silver thread of moonlight slips through the canopy and finds the path, laying itself across stones like a soft, luminous ribbon. The air tastes faintly of pine and damp earth, a scent that holds centuries tucked inside it like folded letters. High above, the sky is a vast, midnight cloth, scattered with pinprick embers, each star a small, cool witness. Somewhere beyond the trees, a stag breathes slowly, the sound deep and steady, a metronome for the night. Its hooves move without clamor, touching the ground with a reverence almost learned, as if it knows every inch by heart. The hush that settles between each of its steps is a language older than any hymn, and the forest hears it. A faint haze hangs close to the earth, tracing the curves of roots and stones, softening the outlines of the familiar until they become secrets. This is the hour when things that are usually hidden by day become clear in a different way, not with flash but with understanding. Light and shadow trade places like slow dancing partners, each move deliberate enough to soothe. In that movement, the world sighs, and the sigh is an invitation to slow your own breathing in time. Artemis moves through the trees as if she were a thought given form, her passage so quiet the leaves barely remember being touched. She places her palm on a broad trunk, feeling the slow pulse of sap and memory beneath the bark, and the tree answers with a gentle warmth. Her fingers move along the grooves in the wood, and the bark tells stories that are not made of words but of long, patient seasons. She inhales, and the scent of resin and loam fills her, as it has since the first nights she walked under open sky. The moon, her steady companion, pours soft silver over her shoulder, setting the edges of her cloak aglow like a calm flame. She walks with a rhythm that mirrors the pulse of the earth itself, step after step that asks nothing and gives everything back in kind. Sometimes she pauses, lifting her face to the lattice of branches overhead, listening for the music that only night can make. There is a sound like distant water, the faint trickle of a hidden spring moving beneath stones, and she smiles as if she hears a secret. A breeze twines through the trees, carrying with it the scent of distant meadows, the faint note of flowers that will sleep until dawn. When Artemis brushes past a thicket, the leaves fold into themselves and then breathe out a little in the wake of her passing, like small, grateful sighs. She moves as comfortingly as a lullaby, and the forest seems to lean closer, making room for the hush she brings in her wake. She does not hurry, for hurry does not belong to this hour, and haste is a violence that the moon refuses to enact. Instead, she walks with the deliberation of one who knows the worth of small things, the value of a low, steady pace. Under her feet, the ferns uncurl slowly, unfurling like pages of an old book that has waited a very long time to be read. Her shadow follows her like a companion who has learned the art of stillness, elongated and soft, never harsh enough to cut the gentle lines of the night. The animals that share her world do not scurry away. Rather, they watch and continue their own quiet tasks, trusting the presence of the moonlit huntress. An owl, high and still, folds its wings and becomes a silhouette against starlit velvet, its eyes reflecting patience like polished glass. A fox pauses at the fringe of the path, its amber eyes soft, acknowledging Artemis with a tilt of its head before melting into the dim. A pair of deer move like living shadows between trunks, their breath misting in white whispers, and Artemis watches them pass with a silent nod. She lets her hand trail across a fallen log, feeling the slow, cool softness of age and the faint hum of beetles carrying on their small, tireless lives. Everything in these woods moves in a tempo that knows how to hold treasures. A dropped feather, a spider's silver-threaded web, a patch of mushrooms like moons of the earth. There are places where the grass grows in circles, and the air holds a frequency that makes the hair on your arms stand like tiny antennas receiving old songs. Artemis stands in such a clearing for a while, closing her eyes and allowing the sounds to shape themselves into memory inside her. She breathes slowly, counting not seconds but moments. The hush between two birdsong, the slow unwinding of a fern, the heartbeat between a tick and the next tick of time. Her voice, when it comes, is not loud. It is small and warm like a stone held in the palm, and every word seems to be wrapped in the same silk that the night uses to cover its treasures. Before I tell of hunts and chases, she says, and her words fall like soft rain on the leaves. Breathe with this place. The invitation is not a command. It is a gentle opening of the door to something quiet and generous. She teaches you to listen not for the loud things, but for the subtle, the way the darkness holds light, the way the night holds breath. Breathe in, Artemis whispers, and you feel the coolness of the pine and the warm, earth-scented depth of the soil mingle in your lungs. Let your breath meet the breath of the ground, she murmurs, and let both slow as if in prayer. With each inhalation you pull in stories, small domestic histories of nests, of the soft, warm places where young birds tuck their beaks, of how the soil keeps secrets. With each exhalation, you let go of the noise that came from the world beyond the trees, watching it thin and fade until it is like a drained riverbed, quiet and wide. Artemis moves closer, and the moonlight gathers around her like delicate smoke, painting her features with a gentle, silver patience. Listen, she breathes, placing her hand on the chest of the sleeping earth, and you hear the soft, enormous sound that is the world's slow, steady heartbeat. It is a rhythm without hurry, without panic. It hums as a lullaby for all the living things tucked under canopy and root. The wind answers her mood by lowering its voice to a hum, and the leaves stop whispering, like excited children to become courteous elders sharing wise, unhurried counsel. Artemis walks the rim of a small pond that mirrors the moon as if it were a polished coin laid out for inspection. She touches the surface, and a ring of silver light expands, smoothing itself until the reflection is whole and true and very, very still. The pond holds the sky in miniature, and in that glassy ease the constellations appear as soft spots of reassurance rather than brilliant demands. Stars are the night's punctuation, she says quietly, watching them blink with a patience reserved for those who are willing to remain attentive. They are not to be shouted but to be admired in silence, she adds, and the words fall like pebbles that make no splash. Artemis kneels by the water, and the frogs nearby answer with a sound like a small content chorus, then fall silent again, as if ashamed to break such perfect listening. Even the insects seem to have learned a softer hum under her watch, and their steady shiver becomes part of the night's slow weaving. She stands and retrieves from her belt a small, well-worn flute, one whose wood has been warmed by countless hands. Her fingers find the holes with a memory that is older than the first story told aloud, and she brings the instrument to her lips. The notes that breathe out of it are low and round and gentle, like wind through reeds, spilling molasses-sweet tones into the air. The melody is not a tune that commands attention. Rather, it lays a path of sound for weary minds to follow toward rest. Each phrase is a soft thread, each pause a space for the listener to drift deeper into the quiet, like a feather carried by a slow current. As she plays, small creatures gather at a respectful distance. A badger with its nose twitching, a hedgehog curled into a neat, bristled ball, and a sleepy bird perched on a low branch. They listen in the hush any creature that knows the voice of peace must learn. The voice that does not demand, only offers. The melody carries no story yet, only the sensation that a story might begin here, and that it will be told slowly and without rush. Artemis lowers the flute and breathes, allowing the final note to hang like a dewdrop that holds the world for a moment before it settles. You came here, she says softly, because the night needs a witness, and because your heart wanted a place to unclench. There is no reproach in her tone, only understanding, like a friend noticing the line between your eyebrows and offering a cloth. Let the forest be your room, the moon your bedside lamp, and the hush your companion, she continues. Tonight, you are allowed to be small and unhurried. She steps back into the path and begins to walk again. But this time she seems to move in rhythms that invite you to match them. Slower now, deeper, more deliberate. The trees hold themselves straighter, as if to better frame the path she takes. And the air grows cooler, cradling the scent of night-blooming flowers. A small brook appears, and Artemis pauses to watch it, eyes soft with the kind of reverence that does not belong to gods or kings, but to those who have learned to care. She reaches in and lifts out a handful of water, letting it run through her fingers like a tiny river, then sprinkles a few droplets toward the dark, as if sending blessing into the unseen. The droplets catch the moon and scatter tiny stars along the forest floor, and for a moment every blade of grass looks like it has been stitched with tiny luminescent stitches. You are a traveler, she whispers, but not one who must arrive quickly. You are permitted to move like the moon across the sky, slow, certain, and luminous in your own quiet way. A moth flutters near her face, and she allows it to circle her without breath or motioning to shoo it away. She smiles in a manner that tells you the little creature must not be told it is insignificant. Everything here has a place, Artemis murmurs, and nothing is ever hurried to its end. She stoops to pick up a fallen leaf, the veins of it delicate and beautiful like a faded map, and holds it to the light between her fingers. What stories it could tell if it had the voice, she says softly, and you begin to imagine the slow, secret histories nested inside the simplest things. As she walks, she tells little, quiet anecdotes, not meant to educate but to soothe, painting soft images with words that are like silk. A fox that learned to listen before it leapt, a fawn that slept through a thunderstorm beneath her watch, a stone shaped like a sleeping face. Each vignette is spare, almost like a brushstroke, and they hang in the air like lanterns that glow without heat. They are stories for the small hours, not for the press of daylight's curiosity, meant to be felt more than studied. Artemis pauses once more in a hollow rimmed with silver moss, and looks at you with an expression that is both intimate and infinite. Keep your breathing slow, she murmurs, and with each breath, remember that the night is holding you in its hands. She lifts a hand and allows the moon to glance off her knuckles, sending a gentle dazzle across the clearing that is like a smile made of light. You will hear my tales in time, she promises, told not to frighten or to startle, but to mend and to nourish. For now, let the world's rush drop like a cloak at your feet. The forest leans in around you both, and for the first time since arriving, you feel as though you belong to something patient and deep and endlessly kind. Artemis spreads her arms for a moment like someone offering a quiet blessing, and the night answers with a ripple of approval. Stay, she whispers simply, and the single word is a world in itself, a permission and an invitation together. You sit, and the ground cradles you like an old friend, and the forest keeps its tender, watchful silence as the moon slides a little farther through the sky. Above, the constellations shift like slow, ancient dancers, their movement a reminder that even in rest, the world continues in its gentle, ordered turning. And as you breathe with the woods, letting each inhalation soften you and each exhalation loosen you, you realize that the true beginning is not the first word, but the first breath shared in company with another who knows how to keep silence sacred. The forest breathes with you, and Artemis watches with eyes that have seen whole ages rise and fall, and choose again and again to be kind. These stories are taken from the same hush you now inhabit, passed down on the current of the wind and recorded in the rings of the trees like quiet signatures, stories such as those in the old, whispered transcriptions of our kindred myths. The night continues to breathe around you as Artemis steps deeper into the silver-lit clearing. Her presence settles like a calm tide returning to the shore, gentle and unhurried. The moon hangs high above, round and soft, as if listening for the next words she will offer. The forest quiets again, waiting, as though all the branches remember the beginning of her story. Artemis lowers herself onto a smooth stone softened by centuries of wind and rain, and she gestures for you to sit beside her. Her movements carry the softness of someone brushing sleep from a child's eyes. "Now," she whispers, "let us return to the time before time was shaped, to the night I first opened my eyes beneath the stars." Her voice falls into the clearing like a featherlight, slow and full of reverence. "It began with my mother," she says softly, wandering beneath a sky that did not welcome her. You feel the forest inhale, as if even the oldest trees remember the scent of that ancient journey. "Leto," she whispers, speaking the name like a melody cupped in moonlight. "My mother walked through lands that trembled beneath the jealousy of Olympus, but jealousy cannot dim the moon, and no fear can silence a mother's courage. The leaves rustle with a sympathy older than myth itself. She wandered far," Artemis continues, "across sunlit plains, across shadowed fields, across shores where the sea mirrored the heavens. She carried not just the weight of her body, but the delicate promise of new life within her. She carried me." The branches overhead sway gently, as though bowing to the quiet strength of the memory. "The world was wide," she murmurs, "yet every place she sought refuge turned her away. Cities closed their gates, villages dimmed their lamps, islands hid behind veils of mist. But my mother did not bow. She kept walking, her feet guided only by hope, and the soft hum of life stirring beneath her ribs." Artemis' hand drifts across her own chest, as if feeling again the echo of her mother's heartbeat from within. "Some say the world feared Hera's wrath," she whispers, her eyes half-lidded in reflection. "But I think the world feared something else entirely. A light approaching, a change beginning, a new voice preparing to enter creation." The moon seems to brighten as if in agreement, its glow rippling lightly across Artemis' skin. "My mother reached the edge of the sea," she says, "a vast, shimmering field of liquid starlight. She stood there, unsure if she was meant to go forward or to collapse where she stood. But the sea is not cruel. It knows exile better than anyone." A soft wind shifts, carrying the scent of salt as though the ocean is suddenly closer than it should be. The waves whispered to her, Artemis murmurs. They guided her gently across their surface. She floated, weightless, carried like a precious dream, and the sea bore her toward a place hidden from the eyes of gods and mortals, a place waiting to bloom into legend. Her eyes shine like polished silver as she continues. "Delos," she whispers, "the island that slept beneath the sky, unnoticed, unmapped, untouched. It was a cradle waiting for its child." The forest seems to tilt toward her as she speaks the name, as though the trees too revere that sacred place. "Delos was quiet," Artemis continues. "Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of deep breath, the quiet before dawn, the quiet of belonging. The moment my mother stepped upon its sands, the island awakened. You imagine it. An island lifting its head from dream, warmed by the presence of the one who needed it. The air grew soft, the wind gentled, the sea pulled back, respectful as a servant bowing before its queen. And above it all, the stars brightened their glow, as if arranging themselves to watch the arrival of something precious." Artemis' voice grows even softer, settling into the hush like falling snow. My mother found a grove of young trees near the shore, she says. Their trunks were slender, their leaves silvered by moonlight. She leaned against one, her breath trembling, her strength depleted. But she had brought me this far, and the island held her with the tenderness of a friend long waited for. The clearing around you seems to shimmer, as if echoing Delos' gentle welcome. It was there, Artemis continues, wrapped in moonlight and the scent of salt and leaves, that I prepared to enter the world. And in those moments, the world itself seemed to soften. You picture it, an island glowing beneath a dome of stars, a woman resting against a tree, the hum of creation vibrating through the air. I do not remember pain, Artemis whispers. I do not remember fear. I remember warmth. I remember the sound of my mother's heartbeat echoing like distant thunder, slow, deep, protective. Her hand drifts to her own chest again, her eyes half closing. It was the first sound I ever loved. It was the first rhythm I ever followed. It taught me calm long before I opened my eyes. She smiles faintly, a softness that melts into the moonlight. And then, she whispers, the stars shifted. They gathered themselves like a circle of guardians surrounding the island, and each star sent down a single thread of light. Those threads wove together above my mother, forming a soft silver canopy, not a place of pain, but a cradle woven by the cosmos. Her voice grows quieter, almost reverent, and beneath that cradle of light, I came into the world. You feel something warm swell in your chest at the image, as though remembering something you never lived but somehow recognize. There was no cry, Artemis murmurs, no thunder, no shattering of the air. I opened my eyes into a pool of moonlight, and the world unfolded in soft shapes and cool colors. The first thing I felt was my mother's hand, warm, trembling, and full of a love that anchored me to the world. Artemis' fingers twitch slightly, as if recalling the sensation even now. The first thing I saw was silver. Moonlight reflected upon the water, reflected upon the sand, reflected in my mother's tired, glowing gaze. And the first thing I heard was the sea sighing, as though relieved. She pauses, breathing slowly, letting the memory flow through her as gently as the tide. I did not come wailing into existence, she says softly. The moon greeted me with quiet, and I answered with quiet. The clearing brightens, as though the moon approves this retelling. For a moment, it was just us, mother, child, island, stars, and in that stillness, I felt myself expanding, not the way mortals grow, but like light unfurling, like a flame finding its shape, like breath blooming into form. My limbs strengthened, my vision sharpened, my spirit gathered itself, and with each second, I felt more myself. Artemis' eyes glow with that same ancient light as she speaks, and when I stood for the first time, the world embraced me. The wind lifted my hair, the stars leaned closer, the ocean whispered blessings, and the moon, my constant companion, cast her first true light upon my shoulders. Her voice dips into a whisper so soft you nearly feel it more than hear it. But I was not alone for long. Within my mother, another heartbeat stirred. She places a hand over her heart, her touch gentle. It was a familiar rhythm, warm, bright, too bright even then, like sunlight hidden behind clouds, waiting for its moment to rise. It was my twin. A faint smile tugs at her lips, fond, bittersweet, full of millennia of memory. Apollo, she whispers. His name floats into the clearing like a golden beam softened by dusk. I felt him before I heard him. I knew him before I saw him. In the hush between heartbeats, he reached for me, and I reached back. She turns her palm upward, as though reenacting the moment. Our hands did not yet exist, not fully, but our souls brushed like two sparks meeting, and in that instant, something within the universe shifted. Light recognized light, breath recognized breath, destiny recognized destiny. She closes her eyes, letting the memory wash over her like warm water. My mother held her breath, Artemis whispers, not from fear, but from awe. The island quieted, the sea stilled, and the stars tilted their faces toward us. The world waited. And here Artemis pauses, long, slow, deliberate, as though honoring the moment her twin took shape. Artemis exhales softly, and the memory of that starlit hush settles over the clearing like falling snow. The moment before my brother arrived, she murmurs, was like the held breath of the universe. No wind, no waves, no sound except my mother's heart beating in steady, luminous circles. I knelt beside her in the moon-touched sand, small though I was, newly formed yet already aware. The stars above shimmered like countless watching eyes, full of warmth rather than judgment. The island seemed to round its shoulders around us, as if Delos itself wished to cradle the moment. My mother's breath trembled, but not from fear, only from the enormity of what was coming. She placed her hand against the earth, and the earth answered with a pulse, slow and strong. I rested my tiny palm over hers, feeling that pulse flow into me, a grounding warmth. And through that warmth, I felt my twin stirring. He was not quiet as I had been. Where my presence was moonlight, his was sunlight hidden behind a gentle veil. I felt him shimmering within her, bright and restless, like a song waiting to be sung. His heartbeat echoed through her like a golden drum, steady and eager. I leaned close to my mother's belly, hearing him respond to the sound of my breath. It was not speech, it was not thought, it was pure recognition, two sparks remembering each other. The universe leaned in as he readied himself. My mother's hands gripped the soft grass, but the island soothed her, sending cool light up through the soil. The stars lowered their glow, weaving a curtain of gentle radiance over her form. And when Apollo came into the world, he arrived in a bloom of light. Not harsh, not blazing, but warm, soft, a rising sun that did not burn. The moment he opened his eyes, the sea brightened. The sands shimmered as though dusted with gold. The leaves of the young trees unfurled, touched by dawn even though it was still deep night. I reached for him, and he reached for me. Our hands met small, fragile, luminous, and the world exhaled. A breeze rose from nowhere, carrying with it the scent of honey and warm pine. The moon widened its glow, as if to gaze upon our meeting. For the first time, I heard his voice, not spoken aloud, but sung in the quiet place inside my spirit. It sounded like the first echo inside a shell held to the ear, a glimmer of warmth, a promise, a greeting, and I answered him with silence, the kind of silence that holds meaning, the kind that wraps around another like a cloak. My mother gathered us in her arms, her breathing calmer now, though her strength had faded, and Delos supported her, lifting the grass beneath her into a soft cradle. I rested against her side, feeling her heartbeat slow into a peaceful rhythm. Apollo pressed his tiny form against my chest, his warmth radiating through me like the first hints of dawn. In that moment, we were not gods, we were not myths, we were simply new life, held by a weary, triumphant mother beneath a listening sky. The stars blinked in slow patterns as though whispering blessings. The sea shimmered with a long, slow roll, peaceful and deep. The moon gazed down as guardian, midwife, witness. My mother whispered both our names into the air, sending them into the universe like lanterns on water. Artemis, she said, brushing her fingers over my cheek. And then, with trembling joy, Apollo. Our names became part of the island, woven into the sand, the breeze, the waves. I remember looking down at him, my mirror, my counterpart, my opposite. He glowed like embers, stirred gently by wind. His eyes were bright gold, reflecting starlight as if gathering it. He reached again, gripping my finger with astonishing certainty. And though we had only just arrived, I felt something eternal settle between us, a bond older than our first breath, older than the island, older than the very light that formed us. We were twins, yes, but more than that, we were two halves of a single song, moon and sun, hunt and music, silence and radiance. We rested there for a long while, listening to our mother's breathing, listening to the water, listening to each other. I remember lifting my tiny face toward the sky. The stars seemed to dance for us, shifting into patterns I had not yet learned to understand. And in their dance, they whispered a message, though I did not yet have words to receive it. All I knew was that we were wanted, that the universe had cleared space, real, sacred space, for our arrival. My mother eventually closed her eyes, weary but peaceful. She leaned against the tree again, the bark cool and firm beneath her. Apollo slept in her arms, a faint glow circling him like a golden halo. I lay beside them, alert and quiet, listening to the night, and the night listened back. You must understand, Artemis whispers softly, that my birth was not a moment of chaos. It was not thunder, it was not fire. It was the opening of a flower at midnight, slow and silent. Every part of the world breathed with us. Every part of it aligned itself to welcome us into existence. The stars dimmed their sharpness so we would not fear their brilliance. The waves rolled softer so my mother could rest without trembling. The island itself settled beneath her, easing her pain, giving her a sanctuary when no other land dared to. That is the nature of Delos, a wandering island that chose for the first time to be still, to allow us to come into the world. When dawn approached, the horizon glowed faintly. It was Apollo who stirred first, his tiny hands reaching instinctively toward the coming light. I placed my hand over his, not to stop him, but to share the moment, the first sunrise of our lives. It crept slowly over the water, gentle as a mother's kiss, and painted the entire island in pale gold. The light touched my skin, cool and soft. It touched his, warm and radiant, and together, those two lights melted into one another, creating a harmony the world had not yet known. On that morning, before either of us could speak, we understood our purpose without needing words. He would carry the sun, and I would carry the night. He would blaze brightly where brightness was needed, and I would guard the quiet places. We were not assigned these roles. They grew naturally from the breath of the world, the pulse of Delos, the bend of the stars. When the sun rose fully, our mother held us close again. Her strength returned little by little, warmed by the light that came from Apollo, steadied by the calm that flowed from me. She pressed her lips to our foreheads and whispered gratitude to the island, and Delos answered by letting its flowers open for the first time that season. The petals unfurled in slow spirals, releasing scents of honey, salt, and starlight. I remember leaning forward to touch one. It felt like touching a dream. When we were strong enough to stand, we rose together, my brother and I. I steadied him, though he glowed brighter with every passing moment. He laughed a small, sun-colored sound and reached for the sky. The sky warmed in response, and I touched the earth, pressing my palm to the sand. The sand cooled lovingly beneath my fingertips. In that shared moment, we anchored the world between us, land and sky, moon and dawn, stillness and song. Our mother watched us through eyes tired yet filled with awe. She had crossed oceans and nights to bring us into the world, and the world answered her courage with two small, perfect lives. As the morning grew brighter, Apollo clung to my hand. He was curious, excitable, already hungry to chase the horizon, and I, already steady and listening, held him with patient affection. We were different from the first breath, and yet inseparable. He looked up at me with eyes full of budding sunlight, and I looked back with the calm of a moon just beginning to understand itself. That was our first morning, the beginning of everything. Artemis falls quiet, letting the memory rest between the two of you like a warm stone. The clearing breathes again. The moon glows softly above, and Artemis whispers, almost inaudibly, "We were born under stars, but we grew beneath the love of a mother who never stopped walking. And tonight, you have walked far enough to hear the truth of it." The night that followed our small island dawn settled into a lullaby of silver and shadow, and in that soft hour I learned to move like a thing of the wild rather than a thought of the court. You have already walked with me through the hush of the forest and heard how Delos held my first breaths. And now I will take your hand again and let your feet learn what mine first knew, the careful, patient steps of a hunter learning to become the moonlight itself. There is an old transcript of voices and memories that people sometimes whisper about in the halls, a record of moments and myths that feel very much like the ones I have told you, and this telling lingers with the same hush and close listening that the old stories ask for. We remain in the clearing where the pond still holds its quiet mirror, and the woods breathe with the slow, steady rhythm that shaped our first days together. I remember the first time I held a stick and believed it might be a bow if I shaped my hands correctly, and if the moon blessed my clumsy attempt with its patient light. At first my steps were clumsy and my balance uncertain, for a newborn god learns the ways of body and ground as a child learns to follow a song. My legs spoke softly to the moss, and my toes learned to know which stones would answer with a firm, steady echo, and which would betray a sharp surprise. My mother watched with the steady tenderness of someone who has carried more than a single life. She sat with the strength of one who had crossed nights and seas and returned to set her children into the world with careful hands. She placed a small bundle of twine and a strip of woven bark near me one evening, and with laughter soft as a breeze, she showed me how to shape my fingers around what would become my bow. The wood felt alive under my palm, a sleeping song waiting to wake, and I ran my thumb along the grain until it hummed beneath my skin like an answered question. I remember the first time the moonlight threaded itself along that bow, painting its curve in silver as if the night itself were drawing my outline for me to follow. There was a shimmer of dew on the string, and when I plucked it with my tentative fingers, the note that breathed out was not a sound, but a promise, thin, quick, and utterly clear, like a moth's wing tapping the air. The moon watched, and I felt its attention as a warm pressure at the nape of my neck, steady and encouraging rather than loud. "Let it be patient," my mother would whisper, her voice a hand smoothing the rough edges of my haste. "Let it teach you," she told me, "and you will learn to speak without shouting." So I learned to wait, first in small things, a stillness between breaths, the deliberate lowering of my shoulder, the careful measurement of how the string would rest against my fingers. The forest taught me other languages too. The hush of a fox pausing between breaths, the tiny impatience of a beetle scuttling beneath a fallen leaf, the elegant recoil of a fern when the earth warmed beneath it. I practiced drawing the string until my shoulders felt like stones balanced on a river, steady but not hardened. The ache of practice became a companion that reminded me the body grows wise when it learns from the land itself. My brother would sometimes wander nearby, his shadow light restless and brilliant, chasing the brim of sunrise as if he could shape day with a laugh. He would watch with curious eyes that held the first stirrings of his love for the bright and the dazzling, and at times he would call out a song that made the birds pause in mid-flight to listen. I would not answer his noise with noise of my own, for I was learning the quieter grammar of patience and precision. Instead, I would let the moon guide my sight, and let the night show me where the hush lived strongest. There was a clearing where the grass bent like a sleeping thing, and the stones lay warm with days of sun, and it became my practice place, an altar of small attempts, where each imperfect arrow taught me something gentle about the world. The first arrows were shy, barely willing to leave the cradle of my fingers, and when they went, they hummed and fell with an honest unpretentiousness that was pleasing to the trees. One glanced off a rock and sang a little song as it slid into a patch of ferns, and another feathered into a moss bank and rested like a small bird newly untroubled. Each time an arrow found its place in the world, I watched not for applause but for the way the earth received it, how the grass breathed around the shaft and the dewdrops did not flinch. That silence was my first teacher of success. It taught me that gentleness and surety move through the world like the secret move of a tide. Years for mortals and moments for gods passed in those evenings of learning, and the moon's curved smile became a familiar companion as it draped silver across my bow like a blessing. There is a particular kind of light that falls when the moon presses her face close to the land. It is not the hard white of noonday, but a soft, deliberate shimmer that seems to slow the very edge of time, and it coated my tools and my fingers in a light that made even the shadows look kind. I began to notice the small, secret ways of prey, rather than the loud, clumsy displays. The rustle that suggested a creature's breath had shortened, the slight flick of an ear that suspected danger, the way a herd's pattern changed into a gentle ebb when the leader lifted its head. To become a hunter of the moon is not to become cold. It is to become present in the smallest vessels of time, listening for the space between a heartbeat and its echo. My huntresses would accompany me sometimes, moving through the trees with a sisterhood that watched my every fumbling attempt with fond smiles and small, instructive nods. They taught me to steady my wrist, to let the arrow feel the world, rather than to throw my intention upon it, and to breathe slow and deep when the wind fooled the eye. It was a strange thing to be both a child and a teacherless student of the wild, to have companions who knew the forest's syntax, and yet to hear a new rhythm bloom inside me when I drew the bow. The first time I felt the world settle in such a way that the strings sang right and the arrow flew true, the sensation was not triumph so much as recognition, like a poem finally finding the single, soft word that had been hiding from it. My chest opened in a way that felt like a door easing on its hinges, and a shiver of delighted comprehension ran along my arms and into my fingers. It was as though the land had accepted the small instrument I had fashioned and returned its trust by allowing a shaft to pass through the air as if the sky itself were guiding it. I remember the sound of that arrow as it cut the night, a sound like a blade of light slicing through silk, and when it struck, the echo felt like an old bell peal meant for no great crowd, but for the small circle of trees watching. I knelt then, not to celebrate, but to listen, to learn what that strike had to teach me about waiting and moving inside the heartbeat of the world. The deer we stalked thereafter were not trophies, but lessons written in muscle and breath. They showed me the quiet dignity of the hunted, when they stepped within the careful line of a bow's intent, and the forgiveness of the forest when I chose not to take another life for vanity's sake. Many times I let the animal pass, tracing it in shadow until it melted into morning, and on those nights my hunters would laugh softly and call me reckless, yet I felt a warmth for choosing mercy when the moment allowed it. Mercy is a form of strength, my mother said, and in those words I found the shape of a hunter who also protected. Sometimes the night would teach me a harshness that was not cruelty but balance, and I would learn to release an arrow because the balance of the wild needed it, and other times I would lower my hand to honor a life that still had songs to sing. As I learned the language of aim, my eyes began to read the land as if it were a map written in currents and scents. I could tell which path water had worn soft, and which rock would throw an echo, which hollow would hold a listening ear, and which branch would betray a sudden gust. The more I attuned myself, the more the moonlight seemed to answer with a clarity that sharpened my sight, without shedding the softness I had been taught to keep. There came a night when the moon was a thin, deliberate blade in the sky, and the air smelled of crushed time and distant rain, and I found myself facing a task that would teach me to trust the quiet in myself above all the loud counsel in my ears. A stag had wandered into the grove, not young, not old, but a creature whose eyes held the forest's dignity like a mirror. My huntresses readied themselves with trained grace, forming the arc of a practiced ring. But their eyes flicked once to me with a question I could not answer, until I had listened long enough to hear my own heart. I knelt on the dew-slick grass and felt the world's pulse there as if it were a second heartbeat to mine, and I reached inside myself for the patience that had been hammered soft by practice and oath. I drew the bow in a movement that felt both like returning and like a small invention. My fingers remembered the rhythm, and my arms the memory of opening like a coastal tide. The moon gilded the curve of the bow in a way that made the wood seem almost translucent, and the string shimmered like a seam of stars spun thin and bright. In that beam of reflected light, the bow looked less an instrument and more a ribbon of destiny tied for the moment it was meant to be held. I set the arrow and did not let the mind hurry me into 1,000 images of what might be. Instead, I breathed, slow, deep, the breath of the forest whose lessons I had learned at its knee. The arrow left my hand like a thought given its voice, singing in a tight, honest arc that matched the moon's patient curve. It found the leaf the stag had worn like a badge of weather, and the sound it made when it struck was not the tearing that mortal bards prefer, but a soft, clean settling, like a page turned by a careful reader. The stag startled, yes, and then bowed its great head in an acknowledgement that felt more like a lesson learned than a death given. My huntresses whispered praises that shimmered like bells, but those sounds were not for me alone. They rolled out and dipped into the thick dark, joining the night's own chorus. I knelt again and touched the place where the arrow rested, feeling the earth's cool steadiness in my palm, and the animal's final breath like a benediction upon my fingers. I did not feel triumphant so much as held by the gravity of balance and the sacredness of taking only what is needed and giving thanks in silence that can be louder than any hymn. The moon rolled eastward, and the stars leaned in to observe us as hunters and witnesses. And I realized with a soft certainty that to be a hunter is to be a guardian of the thin places between life and letting go. This is the way my first hunting days taught me. Bow and breath must join like a promise. Patience must be thicker than hunger. And every arrow must be an apology and an offering wrapped into one. From then on, the glint of moonlight on my bow became my mirror more than any polished bronze, showing me not only a weapon but the reflection of a path I had chosen, quiet, exacting, and full of a fierce tenderness. Sometimes in the hush after a hunt we would sit by the fire and trade small, secret tales, songs half hummed and half whispered, and the younger huntresses would press their palms to the earth and vow to that same patient code. I grew taller over many nights and my steps grew surer. But the moonlight never stopped teaching me to measure the world with a soft heart. When you feel the hush of the forest now, remember that it cradles not only the fallen but also the ones who protect, and know that in the quiet, the moon and I walk together still, teaching new hands how to make their first arrows sing. The night on Delos faded slowly after my first hunts, and the world seemed content to watch me learn the rhythm of the forest. But destiny does not allow the quiet to last forever. There came a morning when the air trembled with a different kind of stillness. No longer the patient breath of the wild, but the anticipation of something immense stirring above. I had grown comfortable in the hush of leaves, in the soft weight of the moon on my shoulders, in the way the night carried me like a daughter of silence. But the sky that day began to shimmer in a way I had never seen. The wind shifted, carrying with it faint threads of gold, warm as sunlight, even before Apollo had fully risen. My brother felt it first. He looked up with an eagerness I could never match, as though the sky were calling him by name. His eyes brightened, his stance sharpened, and the glow around him intensified until the morning seemed to bend toward him. I watched him, feeling the forest lean back slightly, unsure of the brilliance gathering above. "Something is coming," he whispered, though his voice held no fear, only excitement. I nodded, but a quiet weight settled into my chest, a knowing that whatever arrived would change us forever. The air rippled once, like a harp string plucked by unseen fingers. Then the world erupted into brilliance. A column of light descended, unfurling like a glowing staircase made of dawn. Its edges shimmered with hues no mortal artist could ever catch. White that held gold, gold that held fire, fire that held eternity. Apollo stepped toward it instinctively, as though answering a call he had known long before birth. I held his arm gently, grounding myself in the familiar warmth of him. "Stay close," I whispered. He smiled, a warm curve of confidence, already touched by the promise of Olympus. "It's for us," he said simply. And he was right. The light enveloped us, weightless and warm, carrying the scent of ambrosia, starlight, and distant halls. The island of Delos dimmed behind us, as though falling into a dream, and I felt a strange ache, like a farewell whispered through moss and wind. When the light withdrew, we stood at the threshold of Olympus. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Not one sound, but thousands. Harmonies, laughter, footsteps, crackling lightning, rushing air, clattering armor, singing streams each carried as if the air itself refused to let anything go unheard. It was as though the entire mountain breathed music and noise in the same heartbeat. The second thing I noticed was the brightness. My eyes, born to the cool glow of moonlight, reeled beneath the weight of gold and marble shimmering in sunlight that did not dim. The walls gleamed with radiant fire, floors shone like polished dawn. Every pillar reflected 1,000 tiny suns. Even the shadows glowed. I took a step and felt the stone beneath me hum with ancient power, alive and awake, and I realized Olympus was not merely a place, it was a living brilliance. Apollo, however, drank it all like a man offered the sweetest nectar, his face lit with awe and joy. His steps quickened, and he turned in every direction as though unable to decide which wonder to run to first. He laughed, a sound brighter than the marble around us. "This feels like home," he breathed. I wished I could say the same. For me, each sound struck sharp like silver bells clanged too close to the ear. Each light pressed against my eyes until I felt myself blinking more often than breathing. The halls towered above like a whirlwind of magnificence, and even the air shimmered too thick with heat, too vibrant, too alive. A figure approached, robed in stormlight and kingly presence, Zeus. His steps crackled with the quiet thunder of authority, yet his face softened when his gaze fell upon us. "My children," he said warmly, his voice echoing through the chambers with a resonance that made the air tremble. Apollo stepped forward eagerly, bowing his head with a reverence I had never seen in him. I followed, though slower, my senses still overwhelmed by the ceaseless radiance. Zeus placed a hand on each of our shoulders, and warmth rolled through me like distant lightning. "Welcome home," he declared, but the word home felt too loud, too heavy, too bright. I said nothing, only lowered my gaze to the gleaming floors that reflected my shadow in fragments. We were led through corridors of impossible beauty, mosaics depicting constellations, tapestries that shimmered as though woven from dawn's first breath, fountains shaped from cloud light spilling liquid gold. Apollo touched everything as we passed, delighted by each detail, soaking in the brilliance like a thirsty flower drinking sun water. I stayed close behind him, walking softly, as though afraid my footsteps were too impolite for the reverberating marble. Every whisper in the hall echoed tenfold. Every shimmer of cloth struck my eyes like tiny flares. I longed for the deep hush of Delos, for the slow sway of trees, for the embrace of night that softened instead of shouting. We reached a great hall where the gods had gathered, and when they turned toward us, the noise surged. Voices rose in greeting, warm, curious, approving, yet each sounded like it came from a mountain falling instead of a person speaking. Their laughter rang like bronze cymbals. Their movement flashed like reflections on water under a blazing sun. Apollo stepped forward, beaming under the weight of so many eyes. He bowed deeply, and the gods responded with delighted murmurs. He stood among them with ease, as if he had been carved for this world of sound and fire. But when I stepped into the hall, the brightness swelled around me like a wave. The laughter thinned into sharpness, the heat pressed against my skin, and though the gods smiled, though their interest was kind, I felt myself shrinking under their radiance. I stood beside Apollo, but I felt worlds apart from him. He glowed brighter with each moment, his aura expanding until even the torches seemed to shadow beneath him. I remained cool, dim, quiet, a thin crescent moon in a hall built for blazing suns. Hera approached, regal and composed, her eyes a depth I could not read. She studied me for a long moment. Her gaze did not wound, but it weighed. "You bear your mother's calm," she said at last, "and something older." I bowed my head. Her robe swirled with the sound of silk grinding against jewels, far too loud for such a graceful motion. One by one, the gods greeted us. Apollo received praise, laughter, invitations. I received curiosity, soft nods, and then quiet. For I did not speak loudly. I did not radiate warmth. I did not return their brilliance with brilliance. Instead, I listened, and Olympus was not a place that encouraged listening. Zeus presented us with gifts, lifting high 2 wreaths woven from divine metal, 1 gold, 1 silver. He rested the gold upon Apollo's brow, and my brother shone like a prince of dawn, joy burning in his eyes. Then Zeus placed the silver wreath upon mine, and though it was beautiful, cool as moon water, delicate as starlight, it felt heavy, not with burden, but with expectation. I bowed, my fingers brushing the smooth metal, feeling its chill pulse through me like night air. And in that moment, a flicker of unease bloomed in my chest. The hall erupted into applause, thunderous, ringing, sharp. Apollo embraced it fully, lifting his chin, smiling as though head risen into his rightful orbit. But I heard the applause like the clattering of stones tumbling from a cliff, loud and unrelenting. I could not breathe. The brightness swirled. The noise pressed in, and I whispered so quietly even Apollo did not hear. "This world is too loud for me." I stepped back, letting the crowd swallow Apollo but not me. He turned toward me, confusion softening his golden expression. "Sister?" he asked, his voice warm, rising like sunlight. I lifted my eyes. He was everything Olympus asked for, bright, open, unshaking, eager. And I was built from hush, from shadow, from stillness. "I'm fine," I murmured, but the truth echoed differently inside me. I was not meant to blaze. I was meant to breathe. Apollo returned to the crowd, drawn by its warmth, and I watched him shine, watched him glow brighter than torches, watched him find his place among laughter and singing. I smiled for him, but I stood apart. Even in a hall full of gods, I felt alone, not from absence, but from excess. And that was the moment I knew. Olympus might have called us home, but only one of us truly belonged to its golden noise. The hall continued to swirl with golden echoes long after Apollo was swept deeper into the gathering. And though I stood only a few paces away, it felt as though a vast and shimmering sea had risen between us. The gods moved like constellations given shape, each one brilliant, radiant, impossibly loud in both voice and presence. Their laughter flashed like lightning. Their gestures stirred the air like windstorms. Even their whispers shimmered with sounds too sharp for my moon-shaped ears. I felt the silver wreath on my brow vibrate faintly with every echo, catching the light and throwing it back in splinters that made my eyes water. I tried to breathe steadily, the way Delos had taught me, but each inhale tasted of fire and metal instead of the calm, salt wind of home. The marble beneath my feet throbbed with the steps of the crowd, hundreds of gods shifting, turning, approaching, leaving, and each movement rippled through the floor like a quake trapped beneath polished stone. Apollo thrived in the waves of attention, his laughter rising above the others like the first warm note of a lyre. He shone brighter with every greeting, every praise, every call of his name. He was a sun learning to rise. And I felt like a sliver of moon caught in daylight, thin and out of place. I stepped back until my shoulder brushed a cool column carved with swirling depictions of storms and stars. The chill of the stone grounded me, like dipping my hands into cold spring water after standing too near a fire. "Are you unwell?" a soft voice asked from somewhere near my elbow. I turned to see a nymph attendant, delicate, shimmering faintly, eyes gentle like water flowing around a pebble. "I'm simply adjusting," I murmured, though the words felt like small leaves trying to explain a flood. She bowed her head slightly, her movement smooth and kind. "You were born of quieter places," she said, and somehow her voice did not ring like the others. It moved like mist, subtle and soft. Her words settled into me like a truth I had been trying not to look at too closely. Born of quieter places, yes. When I looked back toward Apollo, he was surrounded by a blaze of gold. Zeus' hand rested proudly on his shoulder, and other gods leaned forward to greet him, their voices rolling like thunder softened by celebration. He glowed in their midst, his joy unfiltered, returning their warmth with his own. I tried to imagine myself in that circle, speaking boldly, laughing brightly, matching their energy, but the image dissolved before it could form. The very air here felt too heavy with brilliance, too loud with expectation, too bright to carry the softness I had grown from. My place was not here, not in these blazing halls, not in this world that demanded radiance stronger than moonlight. I felt the pulse of the marble beneath my feet again, loud, insistent, and decided to slip away before the noise could pierce deeper into me. I walked along the edge of the hall, tracing the perimeter like a quiet shadow. The further I moved from the center, the easier it became to breathe. The torches dimmed slightly, the voices softened, my heartbeat returned to the slow, steady rhythm of Delos. And when I found a side corridor veiled by hanging drapes of silver thread, I stepped through it like a swimmer diving beneath a wave. The difference struck immediately. The corridor was still bright, but not painfully so. The air was cooler, quieter. The hum of Olympus remained, but it was distant now, a memory rather than a presence. I walked slowly, touching the marble walls. They vibrated faintly with energy, but not with noise. Here, the mountain breathed instead of shouting. Moonlight drifted in from somewhere, filtered, gentle, white-blue like the quietest hours of night. I followed it, drawn instinctively toward its comfort. At the end of the corridor, I found an open balcony that overlooked the world below. The view stretched endlessly, mountains, rivers, forests, cities, all wrapped in twilight and the beginning of night. The breeze here tasted like the wind on Delos, cool, clean, honest. I leaned forward, resting my palms on the railing, letting the air move through me. "My world is not meant for noise," I whispered to the night. The words left my lips easily, like something that had long been waiting for its voice. Not for shouting, not for shining too bright. My world is stillness. The breeze brushed my cheek in gentle agreement. I closed my eyes, letting the silence of the view seep into me. For the first time since arriving at Olympus, I felt my soul loosen from the tightness the golden halls had wrapped around it. I breathed, deep, slow, the way the forest had taught me. The moon rose in the distance, pale and graceful, a comforting echo of who I was meant to be. It hung quietly above the edge of the world, not demanding attention, not roaring with heat, simply present. It was the whisper to the sun's shout, the still pond to the rushing river, the gentle night to Apollo's blazing day. My brother belonged to the warmth, the noise, the brightness. He was destined to fill the world with color and sound, and I was destined to soften it, to watch over the darkness so it would never become frightening, to protect the quiet places where tired hearts fell asleep, to be the breath between thunderclaps, the shadow that comforted instead of threatened, the moonlight that made darkness gentle. I understood it all in that moment. Olympus was magnificent, undeniably so, but it was not my home. It would never be. The sound of approaching footsteps stirred the air, soft but warm. Artemis? Apollo's voice. I turned as he stepped onto the balcony, golden light still clinging to him like an eager echo. He looked radiant and breathless, eyes shining with the thrill of Olympus. But when he saw my face, his brightness softened. "Are you all right?" he asked, coming closer. His hand touched mine, warm, glowing, and for a moment his aura wrapped gently around me. His light never harmed. It simply existed with enthusiasm. I just needed quiet, I breathed. He nodded slowly, and I watched understanding settle onto him like dawn creeping across a hill. "You never liked noise," he said softly, remembering Delos, remembering the hush we both grew from. "I didn't," I admitted. "It claws at me." He looked back toward the halls. "They love you," he said. "They want to know you." "I know." "And?" I hesitated. "I can't be what they expect," I whispered finally. "I am not made for brilliance." He smiled gently, lifting one hand to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "You're made for the night," he said, "and the night is just as important." A faint warmth blossomed in my chest at his words. He always understood, even when his world was nothing like mine. "You don't have to stay," he continued. I blinked. He squeezed my hand. "Not here," he said. "Not in these halls. You can go where you belong." "And where do you think that is?" I asked softly. He turned toward the moon, bright as a lantern in the sky. "There," he whispered, "in the quiet, in the wild, in the places where breath moves slower and shadows are soft, in the world that needs gentleness." His words touched me deeper than the applause of Olympus ever could. He leaned his forehead against mine. "You are the moon, Artemis," he said, "and the moon does not shine here. It shines out there." His gaze drifted to the mortal world below, where people need rest, where forests need a guardian, where darkness needs someone to soften it. I exhaled, and the night carried my breath toward the edge of the world. "I think you're right," I murmured. His smile widened, bright and beautiful. "Of course I am." A gentle laugh escaped me, a sound quiet but true. He took both my hands now, squeezing them firmly. "I will visit you," he promised, "whenever the sun dips behind the horizon." "And I will visit you," I said, "whenever the dawn is gentle enough to walk beside." He nodded, radiant, and for a moment we stood together on that balcony, sun and moon, day and night, siblings shaped from the same breath but born for different worlds. The noise of Olympus receded behind us like a distant storm. The night ahead beckoned like a soft path, and I knew what I needed to do, what I was born to do. "I will go," I whispered. to the forests, to the shadows, to the quiet. Apollo stepped back, proud, golden, glowing. "Then go," he said, his voice warm as sunrise. "Go become who you are meant to be." The moonlight gathered around me like a cloak. The wind shifted, carrying pine and night-blooming flowers. Olympus waited behind, brilliant and loud, but the world below waited too. Soft, wild, quiet mine. And so I stepped away from the golden halls, stepped toward the night that had shaped me, stepped into the calling that had whispered through every heartbeat since Delos. The world of silence welcomed me home. The wind that rose behind me as I stepped away from Olympus carried the faintest echo of applause. But the night ahead held the deeper call my spirit had been waiting for since the moment light first touched my skin. My feet moved across the shining tiles and onto the mountain path, as though guided by an instinct older than breath, and each step drew me further from the golden noise and closer to the quiet that had shaped my soul. Behind me, the palace hummed like a star caught too close to the ear, but with each pace downward the sound softened, dissolved, and finally faded into nothing but the memory of radiance. The air cooled as I descended, shifting from warm honey gold into the deeper shades of twilight, and with the shift came relief, gentle, steady, familiar, as though the world were exhaling beside me. When I reached the forest at the mountain's base, the first thing I felt was the earth welcoming me home. The soil was cool and soft beneath my toes, carrying the scent of moss, pine, and quiet dreams. The trees swayed slowly, as though bowing not in reverence, but in recognition. I pressed my palm to the bark of a tall cedar, and the hum of its life pulsed up my arm like a greeting from an old friend. "Here," I whispered, and my voice blended into the hush of leaves. "Here, I can breathe." The moon rose gently above the treetops, a thin crescent that curved like a smile, and its silver glow spread across the land in soft strokes that soothed every place still trembling from the noise of Olympus. It was then I knew I would not return to the halls of thunder and gold. I was meant for the wild, for stillness, for the quiet watch of shadows, and I would not walk it alone. In the nights that followed, I wandered through forests, valleys, and mountain glades, searching for kindred souls, creatures, and spirits who understood the language of hush and the dance of moonlight. Some were nymphs who moved like rivers given limbs. Some were maidens who fled the noise of civilization. Some were simply lost. But each one carried something gentle inside them, something waiting to be protected or awakened. The first who followed me silently through the trees was Cyrene. She watched from behind a veil of leaves for 3 nights before finally stepping into the moonlight. I remember the moment clearly, how she emerged the way mist collects into form above water, quiet yet certain. Her hair was dark and braided tightly, so it would not tangle in branches. Her eyes held the steadiness of a wolf who has survived too much to be startled by shadows. She carried no weapon at first, only a determination that glowed beneath her calm face. "I heard your footsteps," she said, her voice low as night water, and they sounded like a path I had been waiting to walk. I nodded, sensing the truth of her words. Cyrene had the presence of someone who carried her wounds with dignity and her strength with grace. She stood tall, but she moved with a silence that told me she had learned long ago how to make herself unseen. "Walk with me," I said. And she did. The second to join me was Polybora, and her arrival was as soft as a breath caught in wonder. She was far younger than Cyrene, barely beyond childhood by mortal years, but immortality had already flickered in her eyes. She followed the moonlight, the way a moth follows flame, not out of blindness, but out of longing. When she stepped beneath the canopy where Cyrene and I rested, she looked at me as if she had known me forever. "I heard a voice in the wind," she whispered. "It said the night is kinder when walked together." Her hair was pale and loose, falling like spilled moonlight around her shoulders. Her gaze was not fierce like Cyrene's. It was tender, still unbroken by the world, still ready to grow toward whatever promise called her. "You are young," Cyrene murmured to her. "Yes," Polybora said, her chin lifting slightly. "But I am not afraid." I reached out and touched her cheek, feeling the warmth of someone who had not yet learned to hide her emotions. "You will learn," I said, "and you will be safe." She smiled softly, and that smile warmed a place in the forest long left cold by fear. Others came slowly, one by one, or in pairs, carried by stories whispered between rivers and trees. They came from distant villages, from mountains where no fire had burned in years, from islands forgotten even by sailors. Some came because they sought refuge, some came because they sought purpose. All came because the wild called them home. Together we wandered through the forests, learning to move as one. During the day, we rested in deep groves where sunlight dripped through the branches like honey and warmed the moss beneath our backs. At night, we trained. I taught them to listen for the heartbeat of the land, how to tell when a creature was near, when a threat approached, when the wind carried warning rather than comfort. Cyrene learned quickly, mastering the bow with a precision that surprised even me. She stood with her feet grounded like roots and drew the string with deliberate care, releasing each arrow as though gifting it to the air. Her shots never wavered, never trembled, never hesitated. Polybora, on the other hand, learned by instinct. Her arrows flew not with practiced calculation, but with the ease of breath. She would turn, see a flutter in the leaves, and release before thought could form. Her aim guided entirely by intuition. Cyrene was a mountain, steady, trained, deliberate. Polybora was a river fluid, instinctive, alive. Together they balanced each other beautifully. I watched them grow with pride carved into my bones. Night after night we forged ourselves into something more than wanderers. We became guardians. We became a circle of quiet power. We became a sisterhood, our footsteps synchronized with the cadence of the forest, and the land began to trust us. The animals did not flee when we approached. Wolves paused on the ridges and watched with knowing eyes. Owls followed us, gliding shadow silent through the trees. Deer approached our campfires and listened to Polybora's gentle singing. Even the streams shifted their paths slightly, carving small pools for us to drink from as though welcoming our presence. The wild, once wary of us, now wrapped around us like a protective cloak. One night, beneath the fullness of the moon, Cyrene stepped forward, her bow slung across her back, her expression solemn and certain. "We are more than wanderers," she said. "We are more than lonely souls seeking refuge. The forest sees us, and the night accepts us." The others gathered around, their eyes glowing softly, with firelight and moonlight blended together. Polybora pressed her hands to her heart, as if she could feel the pulse of the entire forest thrum beneath her ribs. I stepped into the center of the circle they had formed, my bow resting lightly in my hand. The moon fell across us like a blessing. It painted our faces in silver, traced our shadows in long ribbons across the moss, and lit the air with a sacred quiet. "This is our home," I whispered. "This is where we will stand. This is where we will protect." Cyrene knelt first, lowering her bow until it touched the earth. "I will guard the night with steady hands," she said. Polybora knelt beside her, placing her palm on the soil. "I will guard the night with an open heart." The others followed, one by one, each offering their vow with words shaped by their own spirits. "I will guard the weak. I will guide the lost. I will learn the silence. I will honor the moon." And when all had spoken, I raised my bow into the air, letting the moonlight strike its silver curve. The forest hushed, waiting, and I whispered the vow that would bind us as sisters beneath the night forever. We will protect one another. We will walk as one. We will never let fear swallow the quiet places of this world. We are the huntresses of the moon, and from this night onward, we belong to the wild. A wind rose in answer soft, sweeping through the clearing like a ribbon of breath from the earth itself. The trees rustled their agreement. The stars burned a little brighter, and the moon, full and reverent, crowned each huntress with a touch of silver light. We stood together, then no longer wanderers, no longer lost, no longer alone. We were a sanctuary. We were a promise. Our circle became home not because of walls or roofs, but because of the quiet strength that flowed between us. Serene kept watch with unwavering patience, her posture calm as stone, her gaze sharp and protective. Polybora brought warmth to the nights, humming soft tunes that lulled even the restless creatures into peace. Others brought their own gifts. One could hear danger in the shift of air. Another could sense storms long before clouds formed. Another could soothe frightened animals with a single touch. Our talents wove together like threads in a moonlit tapestry. Days passed into weeks, and weeks into seasons. We built no temples, no fortresses, no grand monuments. Our sanctuary was the whispering forest, the curve of the moon, the quiet path between shadows. At dusk, we walked together in silence, reading the land like an open scroll. At midnight, we shared stories in low voices, telling of past fears and new hopes. At dawn, we rested, wrapped in the comfort of each other's company. We carved a life from the hush, and it welcomed us wholly. I watched each huntress grow into her strength, watched her doubts fall away like leaves in autumn, watched her become someone who could stand beside wolves without trembling. And I grew with them, not upward like Apollo, chasing the curve of the sky, but inward, deeper into the rhythm of the wild, deeper into the breath of the night, deeper into the quiet purpose I had been born to carry. Olympus had asked me to shine alongside suns. The wild asked only that I be myself, and so I chose my place. In the forest, in the silence, in the sanctuary built not of stone, but of sisterhood. We walked together, and the world softened beneath our feet. We listened, and the night taught us endless wisdom. We stood watch, and the wild grew safer because we existed. This was the home I had been searching for since Delos. This was the purpose carved into my bones. This was the beginning of everything I would become. The golden deer. There is a place where the trees thin and the moon pours itself down like a pool of silver. And in that place, the golden deer once walked as if it had been shaped from dawn itself. It moved not with haste, but with the confident ease of something that knows its path belongs to the world and not to a single hunter. I first learned of the golden deer as a lesson in waiting, for its coat held light and rumor, and the forest folded around it like a hush. The hunt began not with the sound of horns, but with a gentle agreement between the trees and the winds, and we stepped into the night with feet that whispered rather than stamped. The deer did not flee at our approach. Rather, it moved as one who uncovers a story in slow pages, revealing one luminous patch of fur at a time. Cyrene and Polybora flanked me, their breathing in harmony with the leaves. And we observed rather than pursued, learning the shape of patience. There was a rhythm to the chase that was more a dance than a hunt, a series of small measures in which we matched our pace to the breathing of the earth. I remember the light threading through the deer's antlers like strands of thinning gold, and the way its eyes held no fear, but a quiet curiosity, as if it wondered whether we, too, belonged to this night. Our arrows rested in their grooves like quiet questions, and each time I lifted the bow it was to test not the beast but my own ability to be tender. We tracked the golden deer across meadows that shimmered with dew, learning how to bend with the land's breath so even our shadows felt like companions rather than intruders. At one point the herd paused beneath a lone ash, and the moon stitched a silver scarf around the branches, and in that instant the deer seemed to fold itself into the world like a secret tucked into a pocket. I could have released an arrow then, sharp and certain, but the thought felt heavy and unnecessary, like closing a book before the final page had been savored. Instead, I lowered my hand and let the moment linger, feeling the soft pressure of the earth and the gentle acceptance in the deer's gaze. Serenety's eyes met mine, and she nodded once, a small affirmation that the lesson had been learned, that we could take from the night not through force but through reverence. Polybora hummed a note so low and so sweet that even the moths quieted to listen, and the deer lifted its head as if acknowledging the hush offered in return. We left the meadow that night without a trophy upon our shoulders, but we carried something more enduring, a memory shaped like moonlight and patience stitched into the lining of our days. The golden deer's coat remained a reflection in our hearts, reminding us that sometimes the noblest pursuit is learning to let beauty pass by unharmed, to be present for a marvel without pressing our hands upon it. When later storytellers asked of that night, they spoke of skill and triumph, but I keep the moment simple in my memory, a lesson in restraint, a soft hymn to the art of waiting until the world offers itself freely, the quiet tragedy of Actaeon. There are tales that the forest holds like cold stones, stories whose edges are softened by time but whose core still stings a little when remembered, and Actaeon's is one such story reshaped now into a poem of hush rather than horror. Actaeon was not a wicked man. He was a young hunter with eyes that loved to look, and hands that loved to learn. And in his eagerness, he sometimes forgot the delicate boundary between seeing and taking. One evening he wandered onto the rim of a quiet grove where the trees bent low like listeners leaning in, and there he found a spirit bathing where the moon had pooled into gentlest water. It was not a scene meant to punish curiosity, but a place of intimacy and trust, and Actaeon's unguarded gaze arrived like an uninvited breeze through an open window. For the forest, the moment was a fragile bowl trembling on the edge of being spilled, and Actaeon's presence was the tip of a finger too near to the rim. No thunderbolt descended, no violent hand struck. Instead, the earth and the sky sighed and rearranged themselves into a quieter lesson. The tale of transformation spoken in older tongues is often loud and full of edges, but in my remembering, it becomes the slow folding of pages into a book to be shelved and kept away from the bright light. Actaeon did not become spectacle out of cruelty, but rather drifted into a form that matched his sudden, startled isolation. He learned the world from a new angle, one that taught him to listen in ways he had never known. He wandered, bewildered and soft, learning what it meant to lose the arrogance that comes from always being seen, and to find humility in the smallness of being hidden. There is a sadness in his forgetting, a quiet grief for a man who had not meant harm but whose eagerness had unraveled a sacred quiet. But there is no gloating in this, telling only a soft mourning for the unguarded way he stumbled across a private light. The forest remembers him not as a cautionary tale to brand with fear, but as a reminder of the fragile privacy of things that ask to be loved in secret. We think of Actaeon now as a lesson wrapped in compassion. Do not intrude upon reverence without invitation, and learn to close your eyes when the world lays down its private songs. In the hush of the grove where he once stood, the leaves still hold the echo of his footsteps like a whisper that will not return. And we who walk softly through those paths carry that quietness like a talisman. The river nymph and the moonlit dance, Alpheus and Arethusa. There are friendships that deepen like riverbeds, carved slowly by patient water, and the story of Alpheus and Arethusa is a gentle weaving of affection, distance, and the ways we help one another become whole. Arethusa was a nymph who loved solitude, as one loves the tender corner of a library, with books of light and pages of shadow, and she would often slip to the river to wash dust from the edges of the world. Alpheus was the river itself given voice, a long, murmuring presence that wound through rocks and reed beds, and his regard for Arethusa was steady and soft, rather than scorching or possessive. Their meetings were moonlit ceremonies of water and breath. A foot dipped here, a laugh there. Small gifts of smooth stone left upon the bank like promises in miniature. Artemis watched over them, the way a gardener protects delicate blossoms from sudden storms. Her care gentle and constant, because she recognized in their friendship a mirror of the kind of love that does not demand ownership. One night, when the moon was full and the reeds bowed low with its weight, Arethusa danced along the river's edge, her feet barely skimming the surface as if asking the water to tell its secrets in return. Alpheus replied in currents that twined themselves into small eddies, playful and warm, and the river sang through pebbles and sleep-soft moss. They were not bound by the kind of craving that breaks, but by the patient rhythm of two lives, learning how to be near without consuming. When the world would press in with storms of hunger or the clamor of cities, Artemis would move between them with silent hands, smoothing tensions and reminding each heart of the trust upon which their meeting was founded. Sometimes, when Arethusa wished to wander farther than the river's patient course, she would become a stream of quicksilver, skipping stones and tasting distant springs, and Alpheus would follow, reshaping his flow to find her, not to seize her, but to surround her with companionship. Their love was full of small mercies. A stone warmed on a sunlit morning, the hush of reeds when secrets were shared, a circle of ice that would not melt in the heart of spring. And in the telling that softens myth's sharp edges, their story becomes less an epic of pursuit and more a hymn to mutual tenderness, the kind of love that travels toward each other slowly and leaves room for both to remain whole. Artemis kept watch over their dances, leaning from a willow, her hair brushing the water, her bow slung like a quiet promise across her back, and she felt joy in the way two gentle forces could become a chorus rather than a clash. When dry seasons came and the river's voice grew thin, she coaxed moisture from the air and taught the clouds to remember how to weep kindly, and Alpheus would swell with gratitude rather than greed. When floods rose in anger, she stood at the river's shoulder, one hand upon its bank, guiding it away from villages with the patient diplomacy of someone who has learned to balance care with restraint. Theirs is a story that asks us to notice the unobtrusive ways we hold each other, not by grabbing or tying, but by making space, moving alongside, and lending a soft, steady arm when needed. At the edges where river kisses land, the reeds keep the rhythm of their meetings in rustling that sounds, to those who listen, like an old, beloved song. When you walk beside a stream and see the moon's face ripple across the surface, think of Alpheus and Arethusa smiling in the current, a reminder that love can be a patient geography that maps two lives without erasing either. And know that Artemis will always stand nearby, the quiet guardian who prefers to braid two stories together with a thread of calm rather than to force a single voice to sing alone. Orion, the companion of silence. There are friendships born not of words nor of fate, but of the way two shadows move together beneath the same moon. And my bond with Orion was one such weaving. He did not arrive with thunder in his step or a boast upon his tongue. He approached the forest with the humility of someone who had listened to the wind long enough to understand its pauses. When he first stepped into the clearing where my huntresses trained, he did not ask for attention. He merely watched, his eyes warm with respect, his hands resting loosely on his bow, as though it were a friend rather than a claim. I remember the quiet between us the day we chose to hunt together for the first time, a silence so natural it felt like a path unfolding beneath two sets of feet at the same moment. His presence was not like Apollo's radiant blaze. It was the steadiness of warm twilight, a soft glow at the edge of dusk that steadies the heart. When we walked through the forest, our footsteps matched without effort, our breathing aligned like two sides of a single calm thought. We learned each other's rhythms quickly, how he favored the right side of a tree when tracking, how I preferred to pause by water, how we both instinctively tilted our heads when the night birds called. Our hunts were not about pursuit, they were about understanding, about the way the world softens when two beings move with shared intention. There were nights when neither of us spoke at all, and the silence was a comfort rather than a void. He would glance at me, and I would nod, and the moment itself became a conversation of trust. I never felt watched by him, never felt weighed or measured. Instead, I felt accompanied, gently and respectfully, in a way that made the forest feel wider and kinder. We would sit by the river after long chases, letting our feet dangle in the cool current, and he would trace constellations in the air as though they were stories written just for us. "Someday," he whispered once, "I think the stars might remember you." I smiled softly then, telling him the moon already did. Our companionship was not a blaze but an ember, steady, warm, enduring. And though the world later embroidered our story with thorns and shadows, I keep only the gentle truth, two hunters moving through the night like twin echoes. When his path eventually led him upward, toward the sky that longed to claim him, I felt a tug not of grief, but of understanding. The stars needed a guardian of quiet strength, and Orion's light was ready to rise. One night, as we sat beneath a sky brushed with indigo, he leaned his head back and breathed, "If I must go, let it be to a place where the night is wide." I touched his hand, letting my silence be the farewell neither of us wanted to speak aloud. And when he vanished into the constellations, I looked up and saw him there, shining not with loss, but with the memory of every quiet step we had ever taken together. Now, when the moon lifts her pale face above the forest and the stars arrange themselves in their ancient dance, Orion stands tall, bow lifted, forever hunting in a sky where he can hear the hush of the world more clearly than ever. He is not gone. He is simply farther away, glowing in the place he was always meant to rest among the quiet, eternal lights. Callisto, the bear star. Not all my memories are steady and serene. Some tremble like leaves stirred by a wind that arrives without warning. And the tale of Callisto is a wind that touches the heart with both chill and tenderness. Callisto had been one of my companions, a girl who moved through the forest with a softness that reminded me of new snow, quiet, unassuming, full of hidden light. Her laughter floated like a spark caught in a shaft of sun, and whenever she joined our hunts, she carried joy the way others carried quivers. But hearts can be fragile, and sometimes the world places burdens on them so suddenly that the branches within crack before anyone can hear the warning. Callisto made a mistake not out of malice, nor out of intent, but out of loneliness, out of longing, out of the very human desire to feel seen. And the forest, wise as it is, does not always warn us when something sacred begins to tremble. When she came to me with eyes full of sorrow, I felt the ache of her spirit before she even spoke. Her voice shook like a wounded fawn's sigh, and the truth she carried felt heavy enough to bend even my immortal shoulders. I did not scold her. I did not raise my voice. I only touched her cheek and let her cry into my shoulder. For grief asks not for punishment but for a quiet place to fall apart. Yet the world, our world, had rules, woven into it like the threads of a tapestry, and those threads became tangled around her fate. I gave her space when she needed it, but space can sometimes feel like exile, and she wandered farther into the trees, into the places where loneliness grows roots. One evening, beneath a moon swollen with light, I found her shivering beside a pool, her reflection trembling as though it no longer recognized itself. Her sorrow transformed her not in the violent way storytellers later exaggerated, but gently, slowly, like a shadow shifting into a new shape. Her body took the form of a bear, large and soft and scared, but her eyes, oh, her eyes remained the Callisto I had loved. She gazed at me with the question only grief can ask. Am I still worthy of being loved? I knelt before her, pressing my forehead to hers, and whispered, always. For many nights after, she remained near us, though she no longer walked beside us as a huntress. She lingered at the edges of our campfires, her broad form flickering in the glow, her soul still fragile and full of yearning. I visited her often, resting beside her in the tall grass, letting her great heartbeat steady mine. But one day, her son, young, human, unaware, wandered near her, and fate, with its strange sense of poetry, brought fear to the moment, not malice. Before anything tragic could unfold, my father Zeus intervened. He lifted Callisto and her son high into the heavens, weaving their forms into constellations so they would never again be torn apart by misunderstanding or fear. And there she became Ursa Major, the Great Bear, circling the north sky with her son at her side. Their stars shine a gentle gold, not fierce or burning, but warm as a mother's embrace preserved forever. When I look up at the night and see that constellation glowing steady and true, I do not remember her sorrow first. I remember her laughter, her bravery, her softness, her longing, and I whisper into the wind, "You are forgiven, you are remembered, you are loved in the stars." Hippolytus, a rare purity. Among mortals, purity is often misunderstood. Some think it weakness, others think it pride. But Hippolytus held it not as a shield, nor as a banner, but simply as the truth of who he was. He was a young man carved from quiet conviction, someone whose eyes saw beauty in the way grass bent beneath the wind, rather than in the fleeting glimmer of desire. When he came to the forests where my huntresses roamed, he did not seek favor or glory. He sought the silent places where his heart felt unburdened. He walked along the banks of rivers speaking gentle words to the reeds, took time to return fledgling birds to their nests, and sat with injured animals until their trembling eased. In him, I recognized something rare, an integrity that resonated with the hush of the forest, a spirit that aligned naturally with gentle things. He honored me, not with grand offerings or embellished prayers, but with simple actions, tending the wild, respecting the sacred, listening more than speaking. He never intruded upon my sacred spaces, never overstepped the quiet boundaries set by reverence. And so I watched him with a fondness I seldom extended to mortals. But purity can be vulnerable, for the world often mistakes gentleness for naivety. Whispers rose around him, jealousies, envies, misunderstandings, spun from those who wanted to shape him into something louder, something brighter, something he was not. These whispers climbed into the ears of gods and mortals alike, and soon storms gathered above his path. He suffered not from wrongdoing, but from the cruelty of assumptions, the sharpness of false stories. When sorrow finally weighed upon him so heavily that his spirit faltered, I was there, not in thunder, not in spectacle, but in the soft shadow beneath a cedar. I stepped beside him, touching the back of his hand, letting my calm steady the tremble in his breath. "You have done nothing wrong," I whispered, and his eyes filled with the relief only truth can give. When the moment came for him to leave the world of the living far gentler than tales later claimed, I took his spirit into my arms as one takes a tired child at the end of a long journey. He rested his head against my shoulder, finally free from misunderstanding, and I carried him not downward into shadow, but upward into silver-lit peace. The moon welcomed him with open arms. In her glow he found the clarity he had been denied in life. He became a guardian of the quiet, a presence that walks in places where innocence still breathes. Sometimes, when travelers find courage in their gentleness or feel a sudden calm in the heart of a storm, it is Hippolytus who brushes their cheek with his silent blessing. Even now, he stands near me, unseen by mortal eyes, watching over those who hold fast to their sincerity. His purity was never a weakness. It was a light too subtle for noisy worlds, a flame better suited to the calm of the moon. And I guard him still, as he once guarded the quiet places of the earth. These are the moonlit stories that drift on the forest's breath lessons, folded in silver, reminders wrapped in shadow, truths softened into lullabies. And when the night grows still, and the wind carries only the sound of leaves touching leaves, I whisper them again, so the world never forgets the gentle wisdom hidden in the dark. The forest exhales softly as the night deepens, each breath weaving silver threads through the branches overhead. Your footsteps are barely a whisper upon the moss, softened by the tenderness of the earth below. Above you, the leaves sway like curtains brushed by invisible hands, making a hush that feels like a lullaby written for the trees alone. The air tastes of pine and cold moonlight, cool enough to clear the mind, gentle enough to ease the heart. Somewhere, not far away, an owl drifts between shadows, its wings slicing the night with perfect, hollow silence. The stream hums its slow midnight song, the water curling around stones like a quiet dream turning over in sleep. A fox peeks from behind a fallen log, amber eyes glowing, yet unafraid, for it knows the night is under careful watch. Each root, each blade of grass, each drifting petal rests in a softness older than memory. The wind moves through the branches with a deliberate gentleness, as though trying not to wake the sleeping blossoms. You feel the forest's heartbeat now, slow and ancient, rising and falling beneath your feet like the tide of a sleeping world. And then, between the shadows, Artemis appears, her footsteps so light the moss lifts to greet her. Her cloak trails behind her like spilled moonlight, and the bough upon her back glimmers like frost catching a breath of dawn. She pauses beside you, her head tilting slightly as though listening to something only she can hear. Her eyes glow softly, the same glow that touches the petals when they open at midnight to greet her. She walks forward, her steps melting into the rhythm of the night as naturally as stars into sky. You follow her, drawn by the peace that ripples in her wake. At the crest of a small ridge, she stops. The trees bow in the wind as though greeting their guardian, and with a voice barely louder than the rustling leaves, she whispers, "I watch over this forest." She lifts her hand, letting the moonlight pool across her fingers like liquid silver, "And I watch over you as well." Her words settle around you like a soft blanket, sinking into the spaces inside you that needed to be held. She turns her gaze toward the night, scanning the shadows with quiet certainty. "No fear can enter this place while I walk beneath these branches," she murmurs. "And as long as you breathe in the calm of these woods, you are safe." Then she moves again, disappearing into the deeper blue of the forest, leaving the air shimmering with her promise. The night folds gently around you, whispering its lullabies until the world itself seems to sleep. Artemis, as protector. There are moments when the forest calls not for silence, but for protection, and those moments shaped me as deeply as any hunt or moonlit story. I have seen the tremble in the shoulders of young women fleeing dangers they never deserved. I have heard the cracking breath of girls who wished only to walk freely beneath the sky. And each time, I stepped into their shadows, turning fear into a gentler thing. The old myths speak of punishment and wrath, but the truth beneath them is softer. I am a guardian of those the world tries to break. I have walked beside maidens whose trust had been shattered, my presence a steadying pulse beside their faltering steps. I taught them how to breathe again, slow, deep, like the forest at dusk. I placed their shaking hands upon the bark of ancient trees so they could feel strength that does not harm. When a young girl once wandered into the woods, cheeks streaked with tears, I sat beside her until her breathing matched the rhythm of the moss beneath us. Her sorrow grew quieter, softened by moonlight rather than swallowed by it. I showed her the hidden springs that glow faintly under starlight, letting her wash the weight from her spirit drop by drop. Another time, a woman ran to my glades, chased not by beasts, but by the heavy echo of unwanted footsteps. I spread the shadows around her like a cloak, hiding her in the gentlest darkness where even the wind dared not betray her. She leaned against me, weary and shaking, and I whispered, "You are safe now." The forest, ever loyal, shifted its roots, guiding her down secret paths known only to the wild. She returned to her home not as prey, but as someone who had rediscovered her strength in the hush of the night. There were nymphs who sought my refuge too, spirits of water and leaf, frightened by the storms of the world. I wrapped them in silver light comfort, not transforming them in fear, but helping them find forms that made them feel whole. One chose the shape of a stream, running free and laughing across stones. Another took the form of a swift doe, graceful and untouchable, her fear transformed into freedom. Each decision was their own, held gently in my hands like a bird ready to fly. And when mothers called for me in trembling voices, begging the safety of their daughters, I answered with as much kindness as the world allowed. I guarded their sleep. I stood at their doors. I traced moon runes above their beds, symbols that told the night to keep watch. The myths say I demanded purity, but the truth is simpler. I wanted them to be free, free from fear, free from grasping hands, free to walk into the forest knowing the shadows would open for them like welcoming arms. So I became the shield they could not lift for themselves. I became the whisper that steadied them, the arrow that warned danger, the moonlight that filled their steps with courage. When the world was too loud, I led them into the stillness between trees. When their hearts were too heavy, I let the night carry the weight for them. When they felt small, I reminded them they were daughters of the earth itself, unbreakable, sacred, infinite. If ever you feel afraid in the dark, know that darkness is not your enemy. It is a place I have softened, a place I have shaped for rest, not fear, a place where you can breathe without trembling. And should the night ever feel heavy, listen closely. You will hear my footsteps moving soft as heartbeat through the branches, and I will whisper, as I do to all those who need refuge, "You are safe, you are seen, you are not alone." We continue beneath the same moon that watched us born, and now I will tell you of the quiet conversations between two siblings shaped from the same breath, Apollo and I, the sun and the moon, whose lives entwined like vines, yet grew toward different light. When we were children upon Delos, before the halls and the wreaths, we shared small mornings that tasted of salt and new leaves, and those mornings stitched the first threads of our closeness. I remember the first time he laughed at something I had done, the sound bright and startling and full of promise, and how it warmed the chill of a dawn that felt uncertain. He learned to notice the patterns of people and songs, the way a city swells with appetite and praise, while I learned the language of roots and breaths, the way a forest breathes slowly and keeps secrets. Our mother would watch us with weary eyes and a mouth that trembled between pride and pain, and she would press us both to her chest, as if to mend the world with two heartbeats. Apollo loved the color and noise of life, as though it were a banquet set for him alone. He drank in praise the way thirsty men drink from a river, eager and unashamed. I was quieter, not because I disliked brightness, but because my shape was made for reflection, soft edges, listening ears, hands that steady more than they seize. When the world called us to Olympus, he stepped into its radiance like a bird diving towards sun, while I felt pulled like a root tugged from soil upright, but longing. We would sit for hours by the small pool on Delos, and he would teach me little songs he made from the sound of shells and silver pebbles, and I would teach him how to hold his breath until the world seemed to pause with him. "Do you hear it?" he would ask, bright-eyed, and I would nod because I did. But what he heard was the crowd's future applause, and what I heard was the hush of leaves waiting for a footstep. In those days, he would braid garlands of wildflowers and hand them to me like small suns, and I would braid crownings of low night-blooming petals to slip behind his ear, as if to remind him of the shadow beneath his blaze. We learned each other by doing the things we loved together, shooting at marks, running along the shore, sleeping under a sky wide enough to hold both our silence and his song. Sometimes he teased me with questions that sought to unravel my calm, and I answered with silence that was not cold, but full enough for both of us to breathe into. When we spoke, it was like two instruments tuning to the same note. His voice bright and clear, mine deep and rounded, and in the overlap there formed a harmony that needed no audience. He would tell me of the muses and the lyres, and he would hum a line that could wake a mountain, while I would trace the path of the moon's reflection across the tide and find in it a lesson of steadiness. There were moments when our differences felt like a wedge, small at first, then widening as Olympus drew us toward its separate duties. He loved the temples and the people that gathered beneath them, their glow like mirrors that multiplied his light. I loved the places between temples, the paths people forgot to walk down, the quiet where a girl might mend her hair alone without prying eyes. He found purpose in the shaping of dawn and in the songs that stitched cities together. I found my calling in the slow guardianship of the shadowed and the small, in learning to bring safety where fear had once lived. Sometimes I thought I could stand beside him in his brightness, and other times I felt the brightness would burn me away like morning dew under a sudden, unkind sun. We were given different gifts too, his a wreath of gold and the chariot of the sun, mine silver and a path that taught me how to listen, and each gift settled a destiny like a stone placed into the riverbed. He wore his wreath proudly and learned the cadence of crowds, of praise and promise, whereas I wore mine as one might wear a shawl for warmth, a quiet honor that kept the cold at bay. Even so, we shared a fierce tenderness, a silent pact that neither of us would ever truly leave the other alone. When he found favor in Olympus, it did not make him forget the small island that had birthed us. He carried Delos in the curve of his smile, and sometimes would hum the lullabies our mother used to sing. And when I wandered into the wild places, he would sometimes find me beneath a great cedar, and he would sit and listen without demanding the stage, sharing his brightness in a gentler voice meant for me alone. There were days when we competed not always in games, but in the small tests of will, who could direct the arrow truest, who could make the night sing in a new way, and those contests were never about cruelty, but about learning the edges of ourselves together. Apollo delighted in speed and flourish, in the arc of light that can be seen from afar. I delighted in patience, and the arrow that finds its mark with a breath so soft it sounds like the turning of a page. Sometimes our contests taught us humility. Sometimes they taught us laughter. Sometimes they taught us the ache of curiosity pushed too far. He admired my steadiness and teased the gentleness out of me with rough jokes that somehow left me smiling at the end of the day. I admired his courage to stand in the center of the world's attention, giving of himself with an abandon I secretly envied. There were secrets between us as well, small confessions and promises kept under the hush of stars. I told him where I hid my favorite clearings, the ones where the moon's reflection lay undisturbed like a polished mirror. He told me of the songs that came to him in dreams, and the names of cities he wanted to bless with his light. Sometimes we argued, softly, like two old trees finding room for new branches. But even those moments ended in the same quiet understanding that had carried us since our first breath. When I grew suspicious of Olympus, its brightness, its noise, its hunger for spectacle, he tried to explain its necessity, how light must be given and stories sung, and he did so with patience because he wished me to understand his world. And when he grew tired of the clamor of praise, when fame felt heavy rather than buoyant, I would walk with him beneath low branches and show him how the night can be a balm for an overburdened heart. We learned to hold each other in that way, He could open the windows I kept closed, and I could teach him the art of listening until the world slowed enough to notice the small things. There were times when our affections were tested by others, when jealousies and misunderstandings sought to pin us against one another like moths caught in a jar. Those were the nights I learned how fiercely love could protect rather than condemn. And I stood by him when the world whispered sharp things, and he stood by me when silence was all that could be given. I remember one evening after a quarrel with the halls of Olympus, when Apollo found me on a mossy bank and pulled me into a laugh so bright it chased away the last of my gloom, and for that moment, the space between sun and moon felt bridged by something small and warm and unbreakable. Our conversations were not always about grandeur. Often they were about the most humble matters. Whether a certain bird would return to its nest, whether spring would be kind to the saplings, whether a new song was true or false. He told me of the things that took his breath, the ways a melody can heal a town or cause a child to wake smiling. I told him of how a single, steady flame at the edge of a dark wood can stop a fear from growing large, and how a hand held quietly at night can make a soul endure. There was a balance between us like the tide and the shore, his light shaping the day's edges and my shade softening the night's corners, both necessary and both beautiful. When pain entered our family loss, betrayal, wounds given and received, we learned to be each other's refuge rather than the instruments of revenge. He mourned with a music that made the rafters tremble, and I mourned in a hush that made the trees bow. And together our consolation felt whole. Sometimes the world would ask us to choose sides in stories told by mortals and gods alike, to take up narratives that favored one kind of glory over another, but more often we chose to make a space between the stories where both of us could exist without denying the other. I taught him the patience of the hunt, and he taught me the courage to step into light when the time required it. And between these lessons our love grew like vines, slow, verdant, and hard to pull apart. In the nights when he could not sleep because the chorus of Olympus pressed too loud, I would slip to his side and breathe with him until dawn, and he would rest with a small peace, reserved only for me. When I stood guard over maidens and wanderers, it was with the certainty that my brother's warmth would carry them through the bright hours, and my own quiet would keep their nights safe. Our differences did not divide us. They completed a circle, one half golden and one half silver, each reflecting the other's beauty. So when you see the moon and the sun share the sky in soft hours of dawn or dusk, remember, not conflict but kinship, the moment when my brother's light and my quiet meet, and for a little while, the world is both bright and gentle. And when you listen closely to the hush between a melody and a pause, know that in that space we speak to one another still, siblings bound by the same first breath, loving in different ways, protecting the world together by giving it both day to sing and night to heal. The night has settled into its softest blue, the hour when the world no longer remembers noise, and Artemis walks slowly until she reaches a flat stone warmed by the breath of countless moons. She lowers herself onto it with the grace of someone who has known this place for eternities, her cloak pooling around her like a spill of melted silver. The wind moves gently through the clearing, brushing her hair in quiet strokes, as though the air itself wishes to comfort her. Around her, the leaves shift and murmur in low tones, 1,000 subtle whispers blending into a lullaby shaped not by melody, but by peace. She rests her palms upon the cool surface of the stone, feeling the memory within it, the stories, the nights, the footsteps that have passed across this place like echoes that never fully leave. Her gaze lifts to the moon, high and patient, glowing softly as if it too is settling down to listen. "You have walked with me for so long tonight," she whispers, her voice softer than starlight falling upon water. And now the world grows still enough to hold the last breath of our tale. A hush rolls through the trees, tender and unhurried, like a blanket pulled gently over the shoulders of a child. Artemis leans back slightly, letting the wind cradle her, letting the forest wrap itself around her knees with the warmth of a loyal companion. We have wandered through the hush of Delos, she murmurs, through the gold of Olympus, through the shadowed groves where memories sleep. We have walked beneath my bow, beneath my silence, beneath the songs my brother sings to the dawn. Her eyes soften, the silver within them deepening into something like ancient affection. And now, she says, it is time to rest. The breeze thickens for a moment, then drifts, curling around your ankles like a friendly creature seeking closeness. You have carried your own burdens quietly, she whispers, just as the trees carry their leaves and the rivers carry their secrets. You have moved through your days with a strength you do not always recognize. You have survived moments you thought would break you. And tonight, as the moon rises for the 1000th time above the sleeping world, I want you to let those burdens slip into the night. Her hand reaches out not to touch, but to offer, and the gesture feels like a warm weight settling on your chest, easing your breath. Here, she says, the world asks nothing of you. No tasks, no demands, no noise, only rest. A faint mist gathers at the edges of the clearing, softening the world until it feels like a half-remembered dream. Artemis closes her eyes, inhaling the scent of pine and cool earth, and when she exhales, you feel your shoulders loosen slightly, as if her breath has reached some hidden corner of your being. Let the forest hold you, she whispers. Let the moon steady you. Let the night remind you that you are safe where you stand. The leaves pulse with a gentle shiver, rising and falling in a rhythm that matches your own heartbeat. A soft rustle comes from somewhere above, and a deer steps into the clearing, lowering its head as though greeting an old friend. Its presence is quiet, reverent, and the night seems to deepen its peace around this shared moment. Artemis opens her eyes and smiles softly, her lips curving with the warmth of someone who has watched countless nights like this and still finds wonder in each. You are not alone, she murmurs. You have never been alone. The stars gleam more brightly now, gathering in clusters like small lanterns hung high to guide those seeking comfort. Artemis tilts her head back, studying them as though listening to their distant hum. There is a place for you, she says, not carved by expectation, not built by the world's demands, but shaped gently by who you already are. You need not become brighter. You need not become stronger. You need only to breathe. Her voice drops into a whisper soft enough to blend with the wind. Hush now. The night is here. The shadows are kind. The leaves are singing for you. The forest leans in, its branches curling protectively around the clearing, forming a soft cradle of silhouettes. Moonlight drapes over the stone and over Artemis' shoulders, bathing the entire scene in silver warmth. She looks at you again directly this time, and her gaze feels like a cool hand smoothing the lines of worry from your brow. Let the world outside fade, she whispers. Let the noise soften. Let your breath slow. You are safe. Her words fall gently into the quiet, sinking like seeds into the soil of your thoughts. You have walked far, she murmurs, and now it is time to let the forest carry you the rest of the way. She shifts slightly, sitting more comfortably upon the stone, like someone preparing to keep watch through the long night. I will be here, she promises, until the wind grows still. I will be here until sleep finds you, and long after that, I will remain. A single leaf detaches from a branch above and drifts slowly through the air, spinning like a small, sleepy dancer before settling beside her foot. She picks it up delicately, tracing its veins with a fingertip. This forest knows your name now, she says. It will remember your footsteps. It will remember the weight of your fear and the lightness of your hope. And whenever you return, it will open for you like a familiar door. The wind sighs through the trees, long and slow, as if agreeing with her. Artemis lifts her face to the moon again, letting the glow wash across her cheeks. "This is the hour when the world releases," she whispers. "When the night song quiets, when even the rivers sleep beneath their stones." A hush deepens, enveloping the clearing in a cradle of sound so soft it feels like sinking into cool water. And then, in the gentlest voice she has spoken all night, Artemis says, "Let the forest lull you to sleep." The words settle like petals falling over your shoulders. Let the leaves hush your thoughts. Let the moon steady your breath. And let the night remind you that you are held. A final breeze curls around you, cool and kind, brushing your cheek like a mother soothing a child. The trees sway in a slow, graceful arc, their branches whispering in a language that feels familiar, even if you do not know its words. Artemis shifts her bow against her back, crossing her hands in her lap as she settles deeper into the stone. "I will watch over the quiet," she says. "I will watch over the shadows, and I will watch over you." Her voice thins into the hush, becoming part of the forest breath. The moon climbs higher, its glow turning soft as a lantern behind silk. The stars flicker gently, as if humming the last note of a lullaby. The wind slows, the leaves settle, the world grows tender, and Artemis whispers, barely audible, "Sleep now, sleep in peace. Sleep under my moon." The clearing fades gently into the sound of rustling leaves, slow and rhythmic. A final lullaby woven from night and silver and breath.